When it comes to the software-defined data center, it seems good news abounds. For example, International Data Corporation, the market intelligence and advisory firm, estimates rapid expansion of software-defined networking, SDN, with a staggering $3.7 billion market value predicted for this year alone. In addition, according to experts, organizations embracing SDDC can expect significant reduction in computing and operational costs. Beyond the financial, there's the added advantages derived from centralized management and configuration, network consolidation, and let's not forget the biggest benefit, improved business agility. In this report, we'll explore the advantages as well as the challenges organizations will face with implementing the SDDC. By watching this program, IT and business professionals will have a better understanding of the impact the software-defined data center will have on their organizations. They'll also be better prepared to maximize the benefits and minimize the risks of SDDC as they guide their organizations toward this impressive computing paradigm. This program features expert David Angradi, Director of the Software-Defined Data Center Solutions Practice at Logicalis US. Logicalis is an international IT solutions and managed services provider with a breadth of knowledge and expertise in communications and collaboration, data center and cloud services, and managed services. There are several teaching points in this program. First, we'll start off by defining the software-defined data center, a key part of the service-defined enterprise. Next, we'll drill down and talk about the benefits and challenges organizations may face as they move toward an SDDC environment. Then, with the help of our expert, we'll offer several best practices to help enable SDDC success in your organization. We'll then conclude with added thoughts and advice from our expert, David Angradi, on today's topic. Now, let's begin our report. We'll begin by defining the software-defined data center, a critical part of the service-defined enterprise. To get a sense of the traction that software-defined data centers, along with the software-defined enterprise as a whole, is gaining across the world of global computing, consider these survey results from 451 Research, a New York-based information technology research and advisory firm. 451 Research queried 900 IT pros about their software-defined plans and aspirations. Here are the results. 67% of the 900 IT professionals surveyed stated their enterprises are spending more on software-defined infrastructure this year. 65% agreed that the biggest benefit of SDI was improved agility and flexibility. On the software-defined spending front, 37.4% of the IT pros firms were investing in software-defined networking. 26.9% of that group were focusing on software-defined storage. Only 3% said they were cutting back their SDN and SDS budgets. The ability to lower costs, speed rollout of systems and applications, and literally turn on a dime in response to changing market demands is no doubt quite an incentive for organizations to make the move to software-defined. Now let's introduce our interview guest and expert, David Angradi, who will share his knowledge and experience with this rising technology trend. David, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Mike. I appreciate being here.
Let's start at square one and have you define the software-defined data center. What is it all about?
Well, software-defined data center really, most simplistically, is where you virtualize as many of the assets as possible. So things like your compute, your network, your storage, and drive that virtualization as much as you possibly can throughout the organization. The other big part of it, and maybe most importantly to it, is the next layer up, which is the management and automation layer. And in our experience, a lot of customers, even though they may virtualize a lot, don't tend to spend a lot of time on that management layer. And that's really what helps customers kind of drive that efficiency and agility that ultimately helps them achieve software-defined data center.
Now, David, the software-defined data center is considered to be a stepping stone toward what's being called a service-defined enterprise. Tell us about the service-defined enterprise, and why is SDDC considered a stepping stone?
Well, it very much is a stepping stone to software or service-defined enterprise, mainly because the world that we live in has dramatically changed in regards to how customers, whether they be internal or external, want to actually consume services. If you think about how you go out on a day in and day out basis and acquire technologies or buy stuff, you go to a website, you click on a website, and something happens, right? You get your product shipped in a very timely fashion, and there's just an on-demand quality of that. Well, that now has to be the expectation of where corporate businesses move to in terms of supporting their own people internally. And where a lot of organizations struggle is the fact that they have very legacy data center architectures and methods that were designed for very, very long release cycles and weren't really built to be able to drive an on-demand sort of a world. So it's an important stepping stone, because what it allows a company to do is to be able to better package up different sorts of services as it relates to IT, so that their own customers, whether it be, again, internal or external, can go onto a portal, request what they want, click a button, and then they receive it in a reasonable amount of time. Also, independent of what device they have it on, whether it's their laptop, tablet, mobile phone, whatever. Again, it's important because the expectation of the consumer has dramatically changed over the last 5 years.
Okay, now taking a step backward for a moment, could you say that in the past organizations were more technology defined and now they're moving to service defined? Explain the evolution. And by the way, what was wrong about the old way of doing things?
Well, the old way, if you're familiar with the concept of client server, the way businesses brought in applications was they had a need that they felt an application could support. They'd go out and buy all the infrastructure for that application, install it, do all that sort of good stuff, and everybody would attach to it and kind of go about doing their world. Well, as the world became more virtualized, as cloud started to take hold, this whole notion of on-demand really started to really drive more changes. The old way of doing things, of just setting up this big monolithic application, unfortunately just does not give the companies the sorts of agility that they need to deliver services out. People want things that are more distributed, more cloud-based, for example. Not so much the old client server world, but very much distributed across an entire enterprise, whether inside the company, outside the company, whatever. Regardless of where those applications are located, at the end of the day, it's all about that user experience and the customer being able to go out there via a device, tablet, phone, whatever it might be, to be able to go out and actually request that service and actually get it delivered faster. The old way, unfortunately, just doesn't work anymore. It just doesn't scale. It just has not the speed or the velocity to be able to achieve that.
Well, David, it sounds as if IT will need to really shift their thinking with the service-defined concept, thinking in terms of outcomes versus technology. Do you agree? Could you explain that shift, and in terms of how it relates to a CIO and the IT team?
Absolutely. If you really look at how businesses internally within IT tried to solve problems in the past, it was really all around a particular line of business that had a problem, and they went out and acquired technology to kind of solve that problem. Well, it was always just focused on that particular group and that particular problem. They never really had an eye on, well, if I have a bunch of different groups inside my organization and we're all doing the same thing, well, what's going to happen when the day comes where we have to pull all this stuff together? So when CIOs now have to look at their organization, they're kind of stuck at a crossroads between, again, these kind of legacy data center architecture and methodology that they currently have, with this new service-centric, service-defined way of doing things, which is being heavily driven by cloud and mobility and those sorts of things. Question becomes, how do you bridge that gap? So CIOs now are forced to really figure out, how do I become now almost a broker of services? How do I modernize my existing data center architectures, my applications, so that now I can move into that services-centric sort of approach to be able to deliver services to my customers, rather than focusing on individual business units and solving problems there. I can't start there and work out. I now have to start at the customer experience, the customer needs, the sorts of services that they're looking to get, and then work backwards and make sure that my entire organization is actually lined up to be able to achieve that goal of delivering that service very quickly, effectively, and be able to repeat it time and time again.
So, net-net, the software-defined data center is a key element within a service-defined enterprise.
SDDC is absolutely a critical element. I would even argue that you really can't truly achieve a service-defined enterprise unless you do that, right? Not every company is able to be born in the cloud, like, say, a Netflix, where everyone knows they're out on Amazon. They're stuck with an old way of doing things, and they have to change. And the only way they're going to change is to become more software-defined. virtualizing as many of assets as they can across their compute, their network, and their storage. But almost as importantly is that management layer and the ability to automate and orchestrate all those traditionally very manual processes, because you're not going to be able to move to self-service unless you've done virtualization, automation, orchestration, and pulled it all together through some sort of a management console, which then allows you to be able to model out services really fast and then open them up to be consumed via some sort of a self-service portal. And that's why service or software-defined data center is really critical to achieving service-defined enterprise.
Now we'll explore the benefits as well as the challenges organizations face as they implement the software-defined data center and the service-defined enterprise. With any technology change, we all know that there are always challenges looming. In regard to software-defined data center and the service-defined enterprise, it's no different. One challenge that CIOs have on their mind is dealing with the new skill sets needed to support IT automation, an integral part of the new software-defined world. The traditional, technically adept IT professional is not really the person for the job anymore. Today's IT pro needs a new set of skills that include the ability to convert actual business requirements into policy frameworks that will enable organizations to automate key IT functions, enabling organizations to confidently move toward the service-defined enterprise. CIOs will either need to bring their existing staff up to speed with these new requirements or seek out others who already have the needed knowledge and experience to do the job. In a research study sponsored by WatchIT, CIOs expressed exactly how important it is to build out an IT staff with a skill set to maximize the benefits of software-defined solutions. In the report, 177 CIOs and IT directors from mid-market organizations across 24 countries were surveyed on skill requirements for their IT staff. Here is what they had to say. 34% stated that technical skills were a top priority when recruiting IT staff. 64% noted business skills like communication, service management, and business analysis were a necessity, and 65% of CIOs say they were prepared to pay IT staffers more for the new skills required to make the most of software-defined solutions. With those details in mind, let's drill down into the benefits and challenges of SDDC with our guest expert, David Angradi. Let's talk about some of the benefits of SDDC. What would they be, and explain why?
Mike, I think there's really a few key benefits, and I'll name a few. Number one is going to be agility, and that's a term that everybody really uses to describe really where they can take them, but what does it really mean? And agility to me is the ability to actually very, very quickly respond to business requirements. Because as you become more services defined, what you're going to end up seeing is that your customers are going to begin to ask for more, ask for different things. And by having a fully software-defined data center, your ability to become agile and respond to those needs and potentially shift in a very different direction becomes significantly easier. The second big area, second big benefit is efficiency. You know, as the number of services that you're building out become greater and greater, the demand potentially on your own people internally is going to become greater and greater. So the last thing you want to have is a lot of sorts of manual steps and manual things that these people are doing in and day out. You want to drive efficiency by automating, orchestrating, and being able to standardize a lot of those traditionally manual sorts of things. And that's how you're going to drive and squeeze greater efficiency out of your organization. Ultimately, it allows you to do more with less. Another key benefit of software-defined data center for a lot of customers is time to market. So as businesses really rush to become more cloud-based, to be able to become more digital, the need to be able to very quickly deliver new products and services out to the market is paramount. So by becoming more software-defined, it'll allow you to actually build applications faster, deliver services faster, so that instead of being able to release technology or applications on a 12 to 16 month release cycle, which is what a lot of people are used to, you now can narrow that down so that you are in a 3 to 6 months release cycle, or even a 1 to 3 release cycle. The analogy I always use is, everybody loves when they go to their mobile device and they click on their app store and they see that they got 3 or 4 new updates. They click on that button and they install it and it just works. That's the world we live in now, right? Time to market is important because If a company's not responsive to the customer's needs, well, it's too easy for someone to go somewhere else now. So by becoming software defined, it's going to really allow companies to drive a faster time to market.
So, David, in essence, you're automating the whole data center, correct? Talk us through that.
The most common component that we tend to automate really is infrastructure build-outs. So server, network, storage. One of the big reasons shadow IT became such a big problem a few years ago was the fact that most of the IT provisioning process was broken. It was slow, it was unintegrated, it was manual, there were lots of different tools. And then when companies like Amazon came to the market, really what they effectively did was they made it easy to provision. They made it so easy that companies were just going out of their change management cycles and actually provisioning out on Amazon. So a lot of what we tend to work with customers is well, let's go fix the reason why they're going out to an Amazon in the first place, which tends to be a very broken, very unintegrated provisioning process. So let's allow them to pool the different technologies together that are involved with building out an application or an operating system or a network or something like that, and let's automate those so that it becomes a single click and it takes 10 or 15 minutes to actually provision this versus, in some cases, it could be weeks. I've seen customers that are in the 3 to 6 week range just to provision an application. And in this day and age, that is just unacceptable.
Well, David, I hear that organizations are probably closer to having a software-defined data center than they think. They really don't have to rip and replace their existing infrastructure to achieve this goal. Can you get into that idea for us?
Mike, that's a great point. And the reality is, and it's the dirty little secret that I always like to tell customers, is that you are closer to software-defined data center than you think. Most companies today are already doing elements of it. Whether you're virtualizing your servers or maybe you're automating some pieces and parts of your environment, you're already doing something. You've also probably spent the last 5-10 years buying different technologies out there to solve these different business problems. So when we engage with customers, one of the first steps we take is just understanding what they already have. And in our experience, most, if not all, of those tools and processes can absolutely be reused. This does not have to be rip and replace. It's really more of a fill in the blank and connect the dots. So the idea is to understand what are all the dots that the company actually has in terms of tooling, and then being able to figure out, well, where's the gap? What additional technology do they need that will allow us to be able to help them kind of become more software defined, to be able to automate more of their operations within their environment. And then that in turn is what helps them get and achieve the service defined enterprise.
Cost and ROI has got to be part of any discussion about new technology solutions. In general terms, could you talk about the cost and the ROI of a software-defined data center for a larger business?
Now, from an ROI perspective, we've seen a lot of just amazing ROIs out there in terms of efficiency gains. We've seen efficiency gains in the 90+% range. And you may actually think, well, that's pretty crazy, there's no way. But if suddenly you were provisioning an application and it took you, say, 3 months, for example, and then you automated that entire process and then it took you 15 minutes, it's really simple math at that point, right? That's where you start getting the 90% efficiency gain. So if you look at any IT process that you're driving that's very highly manual, and you can reduce that from weeks and months to just days and minutes, you're going to start seeing efficiency gains in easily the 90+% range.
David, we know that with technology change, challenges abound. This situation is no different. So let me ask you, what are the big challenges with implementing a software-defined data center with the ultimate goal of becoming a service-defined enterprise?
Mike, I think there are a number of really key challenges that all companies need to be aware of. First and foremost is organizationally. One of the biggest reasons why we see these projects not tend to get off the ground very well tends to be organizationally. And if a CIO does not get everybody on the same page with the direction of moving to this kind of service-defined enterprise, inevitably what's going to happen is it's such a big change from the way people are doing their jobs day in and day out, they push back. They dig their heels in. They like the tools that they're using. They like the way that they're doing things. And in a lot of cases, they will resist. And in the bigger the organization, the more imperative that it really means to actually do that. So one of the first things, and I've had CIOs ask me, why do these projects fail? I'll always say the number one reason is organization. It's paramount that you have somebody that has a vision, has the ability to actually get everybody on the same page, because once you do that, that's what's going to really allow you to actually drive towards that goal quickly and efficiently. Otherwise, you're going to struggle, and then the project could inevitably fail.
So what are the actual steps involved in moving from a technology-defined to service-defined organization?
Well, I always like to approach any sort of a company by first understanding, what are you doing today? How are you doing things? What does your IT organization look like? What does your business look like? What are the sorts of business initiatives you're driving towards? How are you growing the business? So in terms of helping customers enable a service-defined enterprise, it's not just about understanding their IT, but it's also understanding the business and understanding where the business wants to go. Because ultimately, in really any organization, IT is a critical driver of innovation within any business. So what's important in terms of understanding where you want IT to go, you have to understand where the business is going, and then be able to kind of help tie together how IT can actually support those efforts to be able to drive that business. It's not the other way around, which unfortunately a lot of organizations do. They're so focused on IT and keeping the lights on and doing their day-to-day tasks, they don't have any time to innovate and help drive the business. And that's when you see that clash between the business and IT. It's also why you see public cloud providers become so big. Microsoft, Amazon, players like that, because they've made IT easy. So if IT providers really want to remain relevant to the business, they're going to have to align exactly to the business's core objectives. Otherwise, they do risk some level of irrelevancy, because there's a lot of providers out there that are just kind of itching to take that business. There are just a few simple steps you can start with, regardless of where the business initiatives are. And number one, it's virtualize as much as you can, right? And the more you can virtualize, the better off you are. There's tons of benefits for doing that. The other thing is to really think about is as I talked about in a little while ago, is you really do have to start with a plan of getting everybody on board. Once that plan's in place, you virtualized, now you got to start thinking about automation and orchestration. How do we start pulling out a lot of the manual sorts of steps of managing and delivering IT services? Start figuring out, and that's where Logicalis can help, is helping customers understand, where do you start? Because ultimately, you can automate anything. You can orchestrate anything. The hard part is trying to figure out where to start. I always tell customers, you can boil the ocean with this stuff. You literally can, but you don't want to. Let's start with a small number of use cases, maybe 3 or 4. Maybe provisioning a system or integrating some different tools, and slowly start delivering services out to the business. That then increases adoption. Start small and move from there and get the quick wins as they need. And once you start automating and orchestrating, now you can start building out and start tying these things to the different business initiatives. Well, how can I actually use IT to help enable faster delivery of services out to my customers, whatever they may be, mobile applications, websites, you name it, whatever it may be. And now you're well on the path to actually delivering that.
Well, David, I'm curious, exactly how will SDDC allow businesses and IT to work together and to meet the objectives of the business? What are the details?
Well, I think what's most important when business and IT are coming together is you need to have shared vision, shared goals, right? And you start with that and kind of work backwards. And when IT is setting up their organization and making their technology decisions, and even how they're aligning their organization, what's most important is they actually align that organization to the business. We've seen a lot of companies that are going through this shift actually realign organizations and have reporting structures that never traditionally worked together are now under the same reporting structure. That's a really, really big piece if you're going to be able to do a services-centric approach. The business doesn't care what application, what network device, what server, if it's HP versus Cisco the business doesn't care. At the end of the day, the business wants to know that they can go quickly deliver services out to market, and then they can very quickly respond to customer needs as they change. The only way you're going to do that is by lining up the business and the IT so that they have those shared goals and that shared vision.
Could you give us a quick example of an SDDC success story? Tell us what were the ultimate benefits the organization realized.
Mike, we had a really interesting use case of a customer that was having trouble onboarding new customers. And this was a SaaS provider that had an application that when they got an order in, it was taking them in the order of about 2 weeks to be able to provision the actual service to that customer. What they realized was that wasn't going to cut it. Customers, when they placed an order, they were going to want to have their service delivered faster. So what we did was we brought in a software-defined capability that virtualized the entire environment. We brought in the management capabilities and the automation capabilities so that we took all the different pieces and parts that were all involved in delivering that SaaS service. We pulled it all together and reduced it from roughly 13 days to under 4 hours. So if you think about the benefit there, we talked a little earlier about the 90+ efficiency gain. In a situation like this is really more of a time to market, kind of order to cash sort of a scenario, where instead of it taking 13 days to be able to start generating revenue, you just reduced it to effectively less than a day. Tremendous value, tremendous ROI was delivered on that engagement.
Let's wrap up our report and hear some final thoughts and advice from our expert, David Angradi, on today's topic. We began our program by defining the software-defined data center, learning why SDDC is considered to be a stepping stone toward the service-defined enterprise. Next, we discussed the benefits and challenges organizations may face as they move toward this new computing environment. We then talked about how organizations will need to transition from technology-defined to service-defined, and how the skill sets of the IT staff will need to change to support that evolution. Next, we'll conclude with several best practices to help enable SDDC success in your organization. Okay, David, finish this statement for me. The reason SDDC makes sense for business and IT is?
Well, the reason it makes sense is because it's going to allow customers to truly bridge that gap and move to kind of the newer style of IT and move away from the legacy data center architectures and ultimately be able to deliver services to their customers faster, more efficiently, and far more cost effectively.
Please summarize some of your advice today in the form of several best practices for SDDC success.
Mike, I think some of the best practices for SDD success are, first and foremost, start with a plan. Get everybody on the same page in terms of what your vision is and where you want to take the business. Because if you don't do that, inevitably it's going to fail. The other best practice is, expect to fail. Expect to have problems along the way. Things are going to go bump in the night. Right? This is never a perfect sort of a scenario as you really change the way that your business does business, and the way the people inside of your business do business. So there's going to be a bit of a learning curve, and that's okay. What's most important is start with that plan, stick to the plan, and make sure you're getting people on board. The technology at this point almost becomes secondary, because when you really look at the major vendors that are playing in this space, for the most part, they're all doing very, very similar things. So at the end of the day, technology decisions aren't necessarily the most important decisions. It's really more about the organization, what are the business objectives, and understanding that everything that we do has to be tied to those business objectives.
David Angradi, thank you so much for speaking with us today about the software-defined data center.
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate the time.
That concludes our report, Software-Defined Data Center, a step toward the service-defined enterprise. I'm Michael Quinlan, and thanks for watching.